Nobody in Studio One understood what they were about to witness, but years later those who were there would all agree on one thing. The moment the cameras stopped, something ancient and terrifying rose to the surface, and the only person who truly saw it was Lucille Ball. March, late 1970s, NBC Burbank. The Tonight Show was running like clockwork, just as it had for nearly 2 decades. The audience filed in, 300 strong, buzzing with anticipation. Millions more settled into their couches across America, trusting that familiar ritual that ended every day the same way. A monologue, a desk, a man who never faltered. Johnny Carson walked through the curtain at precisely 5:30 p.m., smile fixed, posture perfect, timing impeccable. The band hit the intro, Ed McMahon laughed on cue, and Johnny delivered jokes about politics, gas lines, and the slow creep of getting older, each punchline landing exactly where it was supposed to. To the audience, he was effortless. To the crew, he was flawless. To America, he was unbreakable. But backstage, Lucille Ball watched him with the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime reading rooms, faces, and silences. She wasn't scheduled to appear. She hadn't come to promote anything. Her name wasn't on the rundown. She had simply asked if she could sit in. That alone raised eyebrows. Lucille was never early, never unplanned, never casual about her time. Yet that night she arrived nearly an hour before taping, dressed simply, standing quietly off to the side, watching Johnny rehearse. She noticed the way his laugh came a fraction of a second late during warm-ups, the way his hand lingered on the edge of the desk as if grounding himself. Small things, invisible things, the kind of things only another performer at the top of their craft would clock. When the show went live, Johnny transformed the way he always did. The switch flipped. The mask locked into place. The man America adored appeared fully formed, relaxed, and in total control. The first segment sailed by. Applause came easy. The studio felt warm, safe, predictable. Lucille sat just off stage, half in shadow, watching not the show, but the man beneath it. Midway through the night, during an otherwise harmless exchange, a guest made an offhand reference to early military service in the 1950s. Nothing dramatic. No graphic detail. Just a date, a place, a passing memory. The audience barely reacted. Johnny nodded, smiled, and prepared to pivot to a joke. But Lucille saw it. The microsecond where his jaw tightened. The flash behind his eyes that didn't belong to the present. It wasn't distraction. It wasn't irritation. It was recognition. Like a door cracking open somewhere deep and long sealed. Johnny recovered instantly. He always did. The joke landed. Laughter covered everything. The cameras kept rolling. But Lucille's stomach tightened. She had seen that look before, in herself and in others, in moments when memory ambushed performance. The segment ended smoothly. Applause rose. The director called for a commercial break. And then the red light went off. What happened next was never broadcast, never recorded, and never spoken about publicly, but it would live in Lucille Ball's mind for the rest of her life. Johnny's smile didn't fade. It vanished, gone as if it had never existed. His face drained of color so quickly it was startling, gray under the studio lights. His hands, which had been steady moments earlier, began to tremble, not violently, but uncontrollably, like a current running through them. He stood as if to step away from the desk, and nearly lost his balance, gripping the edge to stay upright. The studio, still full of people, seemed to hold its breath. Ed McMahon turned toward him, concern creeping into his voice. A stagehand took a step forward. A producer hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Johnny didn't respond to anyone. His eyes weren't unfocused. They were fixed on something no one else could see, staring past the audience, past the cameras, past the present. His breathing shortened, shallow and sharp, as if the air in the room had suddenly thinned. Lucille didn't hesitate. She stood and moved toward him, her heels quiet against the stage floor. She had commanded studios larger than this, faced panic, chaos, and failure live on air. She recognized a breaking point when she saw one. "Clear the studio," she said calmly. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough. The authority in her voice cut through the confusion. People moved without asking why. The audience was ushered out. The doors closed. The laughter, the chatter, the machinery of television drained away, leaving behind an echoing silence that felt too big for the room. Johnny tried to speak. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His throat worked as if forcing words past something lodged deep inside. Then, so quietly Lucille almost missed it, he whispered 3 words that made her blood run cold. Words that didn't belong to comedy or television or the safe world they'd just been inhabiting. Words that sounded like a confession dragged up from the bottom of the ocean. Lucille stepped closer, close enough to see the fear he was trying and failing to contain, close enough to understand that the man in front of her wasn't collapsing under pressure, but reliving something he had never escaped. She reached out, grounding him, anchoring him to the present with her voice, her presence, her certainty. The show would resume. The audience would return. America would never know. But in that moment, with the cameras dark and the studio emptying, Lucille Ball understood something that would haunt her forever. The man who made the nation laugh every night had been surviving something unspeakable in silence, and the cost of that survival was finally coming due. The studio doors closed with a soft, final sound that felt far too loud in the sudden emptiness, and in that quiet, Lucille Ball realized how fragile the moment truly was. The machinery of television had stopped. No music, no applause, no red light to hide behind. Just a man standing under hot studio lamps, breathing like he'd run out of air at the bottom of the sea. Johnny Carson gripped the edge of his desk as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. His shoulders were rigid, locked in place, every muscle straining against something invisible. Lucille stepped fully into his line of sight and spoke his name again, slower this time, grounding each syllable. Johnny didn't answer right away. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the studio. They were somewhere else entirely, somewhere colder, darker, and decades away. When he finally inhaled deeply, it came with a sharp hitch, like his body had forgotten how breathing was supposed to work. Ed McMahon hovered a few steps back, torn between loyalty and fear, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. A producer whispered something about calling a doctor. Lucille raised her hand again, firmer now. "Give us a minute," she said. "All of you." No one argued. They backed away instinctively, as if sensing that this wasn't a medical emergency they could fix with procedure or protocol. Johnny's lips moved again, silently at first, then barely audible. He wasn't speaking to anyone in the room. He was narrating something only he could see. Fragmented phrases slipped out between shallow breaths. Colors, sounds, water, shouting. None of it made sense on the surface, but Lucille understood the shape of it. She had known performers who carried private catastrophes inside them. Memories locked away so tightly they believed they were buried for good. She knew what it looked like when those memories forced their way back to the surface without warning. She gently guided Johnny away from the desk and onto the couch where guests usually sat. He collapsed into it, his body folding inward, smaller somehow, like the years had peeled away all at once. Lucille sat beside him, close enough that he couldn't drift too far. "You're here," she said again, steady and calm. "You're safe. The show is paused. You're not alone." Johnny swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally came, sounded nothing like the one America knew. It was raw, stripped of polish and humor. "I thought I left it there," he said, staring at the floor. "I thought I'd buried it." Lucille didn't rush him. Silence, she knew, could be just as important as words. He rubbed his hands together as if trying to warm them, even though the studio was hot. "It comes back like it's happening again," he continued, each sentence costing him visible effort. "Not like a memory, like I'm back inside it." His breathing stuttered. Lucille nodded, not because she fully understood the details, but because she understood the weight. She had seen that same look in veterans backstage, in actors who drank too much between takes, in comedians who never stopped talking because silence was dangerous. "You don't have to explain it right now," she said softly. "You don't owe anyone a story." That seemed to help. Johnny leaned back slightly, eyes closed now, focusing on the sound of her voice. Outside the studio, the audience waited, confused but patient. The crew whispered, careful not to break whatever fragile calm was forming inside. Minutes passed. Johnny's breathing slowed. The tremor in his hands eased, though it didn't disappear completely. He opened his eyes and looked at Lucille, really looked at her this time, and something like shame crossed his face. "They saw me," he said quietly. "They saw me lose it." Lucille's expression hardened, not unkindly, but with conviction. "No," she corrected him. They saw a man who needed a moment. There's nothing shameful about that. He let out a short, humorless laugh. That's easy for you to say. I'm not supposed to crack. That's my job. Lucille turned toward him fully. Your job, she said, isn't to be unbreakable. It's to be human and show up anyway. Johnny absorbed that in silence. Somewhere in the distance, a stage manager knocked lightly, asking if they were ready. Johnny straightened slowly, testing himself, as if checking whether the ground beneath him would hold. I can finish, he said. It wasn't bravado. It was resolve. Lucille studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, she said. But you finish on your terms. When the audience was brought back in and the cameras powered up, Johnny returned to his desk. His face was composed again, though a careful observer might have noticed the effort it took. The red light blinked on. America leaned forward. The show resumed as if nothing had happened. Jokes landed. Smiles returned. The illusion held. But Lucille watched from the side, knowing she had just witnessed something that would never be part of television history, something no rerun would ever show. She knew that behind every laugh Johnny delivered for the rest of his career, there would be a shadow she alone had seen clearly, and that knowledge settled inside her like a quiet, permanent weight she would carry long after the studio lights went dark. The night ended the way all Tonight Show nights did, with applause, music, and the comforting illusion that everything was exactly as it had always been. Johnny Carson shook hands, thanked the audience, and disappeared backstage, once again the professional everyone expected him to be. But Lucille Ball stayed behind longer than usual, standing quietly in the dim studio as the crew dismantled lights and rolled cables away, replaying what she had seen again and again. Johnny never spoke to her about it directly. He didn't need to. From that night forward, she noticed subtle changes. How he lingered longer in conversation, how his laughter off camera came a little softer, how the armor he wore seemed thinner with those he trusted. Lucille carried the secret alone, honoring the unspoken agreement that some moments are not meant for audiences or headlines. Years later, when Johnny was gone and the world spoke only of his brilliance, his timing, his control, Lucille would think back to that silent studio and the man who had almost been pulled under by a memory too heavy to keep buried. She understood then what most never would, that the strength people admired in him wasn't the perfection they saw on television, but the courage it took to keep showing up while carrying something unspeakable inside. And long after the laughter faded, that was the part of Johnny Carson she remembered most, the human being behind the desk, briefly seen and fiercely protected.